You know that moment when you realize the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally actually had conditionally all along? Yeah. That moment hit me so hard I couldn't breathe. And the wildest part? It took my daughter, a 14-year-old girl, to say one single sentence that made my entire family go completely silent. We're talking grown adults, shaking. But before I tell you what she said, I need to take you back to where this whole thing started, because if I just gave you the ending, you wouldn't believe me. You'd think I was exaggerating. So stay with me, because this story is going to make your jaw drop. My name is Jessica, and for most of my life, I believed my family was normal. Not perfect, but normal. My parents were hardworking people. My dad was quiet, kind of kept to himself. My mom was the louder one, the organizer, the one who made sure every holiday felt like a magazine spread. And then there was Barbara, my sister. 3 years older than me and, honestly, the center of my parents' entire universe. Now look, I'm not saying that as a bitter kid throwing a tantrum. I'm saying it because it was just true and everyone around us could see it. Barbara got the bigger bedroom. Barbara got the car on her 16th birthday. Barbara's college was fully funded while I was handed a list of student loans and told to figure it out. And every single time I brought it up, my mom would say, "Jessica, stop comparing. Life isn't a competition." But somehow, whenever Barbara needed something, life always seemed to find a way to work out perfectly for her. I learned to live with it. I really did. I built my own life. I met a man named David, and he was everything my family wasn't. Steady, warm, the kind of person who actually showed up. We got married, we had our daughter Karen, and I poured every single bit of love I had into that little family of mine. I stopped waiting for my parents to choose me. I made peace with it, or at least, I thought I did. Then David got sick. And I don't mean a little sick. I mean the kind of sick where doctors sit you down in a small room with bad lighting and speak in soft voices. Stage 3, that's what they said. And just like that, my whole world cracked open. Karen was 12 at the time. 12 years old, watching her dad go through chemotherapy, watching her mom fall apart and try to hold it together at the same time. Those 2 years were the hardest of my life, harder than anything I had ever imagined. And through all of it, I kept thinking, okay, this is when my family steps up. This is when my parents show up for me the way I always needed them to. They visited twice, in 2 years. Now hold on, because it gets worse, so much worse. And the part coming up next, this is where I need you to really pay attention. David passed away on a Tuesday morning in March. Karen was 14 by then. I called my mom from the hospital parking lot sitting in my car, unable to drive, just completely hollow inside. And my mom? She cried. She said all the right words. She said she was so sorry. She loved David, she loved me, she'd be there. And for just a moment, I felt it, that tiny flicker of hope that grief sometimes gives you, that maybe people will rise to the occasion, that maybe this loss would bring us closer. The funeral was on a Saturday. My parents came. Barbara came. They sat in the front row with me and Karen, and it felt okay. It felt like family. I remember looking over at my mom during the service, and she was crying. And I thought, she's here. She's really here with me. Then the following weekend came. Barbara's birthday was the weekend after David's funeral. 1 week. 7 days after I buried my husband, my parents called to let me know they'd be flying out to celebrate Barbara's birthday in Miami. They had booked a whole trip. Resort, dinner reservations, the works. And my mom said, and I want you to hear this clearly, she said, "Jessica, you understand, right? We already had this planned. Barbara's been looking forward to it. We can't just cancel." I went completely numb. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just said, okay. And I hung up the phone and I sat on the kitchen floor for I don't even know how long. Karen found me there. She sat down next to me, didn't say a word, just put her head on my shoulder. And I remember thinking, this child just lost her father, and she's the one comforting me. That thought alone almost broke me completely. But wait. Because what happened at Barbara's birthday party is something I still can't fully process. And that's the part that set everything into motion. So they went. My parents flew to Miami and celebrated Barbara's birthday 1 week after my husband's funeral. And I genuinely tried to focus on Karen. We ordered pizza that Saturday night. We watched a movie, we cried a little and laughed a little, and I held her so tight, but inside me, something had shifted. Something that had been slowly bending for years finally snapped. About a month later, my mom called and asked if Karen and I would come to Sunday dinner. She wanted to reconnect, she said. She wanted to check in on us. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Jessica, don't go. But I went, because even after everything, some part of me was still that little girl who just wanted her mom to see her. Karen didn't want to go. She was quiet about it, didn't make a big fuss. But I could tell. She just said, "Are you sure, Mom?" And I said yes. I was sure. Dinner was at my parents' house. Barbara was there with her husband and their 2 kids. And at first it was fine. It was surface level fine, the kind of fine where everyone is being careful with their words and nobody is really saying anything real. My mom had made a big meal. The table looked beautiful, and I sat there trying to eat and trying to be present. Then Barbara started talking about her birthday trip. She started describing the resort, the dinners, the boat they rented for the day. And she was glowing. She was genuinely happy. And I watched my parents light up listening to her talk. My dad was laughing. My mom was asking follow-up questions. And I just sat there. 1 week after my husband's funeral, sitting at that table, listening to birthday trip highlights like I was a stranger who had wandered in off the street. I didn't say anything. I looked down at my plate and I focused on breathing. But Karen was watching. Karen saw all of it, and she was very, very quiet. Then my mom turned to me and said, and I promise you, she said this with a straight face. She said, "Jessica, you really need to start thinking about moving forward. It's been a month. Karen needs to see you being strong." And that was it. That was the moment. Because before I could even respond, before I could even figure out what words were available to me in that moment, Karen put down her fork. She looked directly at my mother, and she said one sentence. And I need you to understand, this is a 14-year-old girl who had just lost her father, who had watched her mother be invisible to this family her entire life, who had spent the last month sleeping in my bed because she was scared to be alone. This child, this quiet, gentle girl, looked my mother in the eyes across that dinner table, and she said, "Grandma, you went to a birthday party the same week we buried my dad. You don't get to tell my mom how to grieve." The table went completely silent. And I mean completely, not an uncomfortable pause. Not a moment where someone clears their throat and moves on. I mean the kind of silence that has weight to it. My dad put his fork down slowly. Barbara's husband looked at the wall. My mom's face did something I'd never seen it do before. It just crumpled. Not in anger. In something else. Something that looked a lot like shame. Nobody said a word for what felt like a very, very long time. And Karen didn't look away. She just sat there, calm, steady, like she had been waiting her whole life to say exactly that. And maybe she had. Maybe we both had. I reached over and I put my hand on hers under the table and I felt her squeeze my fingers and I had to look down because I was not going to cry. Not there. Not in front of all of them. My mom finally spoke. She said, "Karen, And then she stopped. She tried again. "We thought it was important to," and she stopped again. And for the first time in my entire life, I watched my mother not have words. This woman who always had an answer, always had a reason, always had a way to explain herself out of anything, she had nothing. Because what Karen said was so simple and so true that there was genuinely no counter to it. There was no spin. There was no way to dress it up. The truth had been placed on the table just as plainly as the food, and now everyone had to sit with it. Barbara looked at me, and in her eyes I saw something I didn't expect. I didn't see defensiveness. I saw guilt. Real guilt. The kind you can't fake. She looked at her hands and she said quietly, "Jess, I'm sorry. I should have said something. I should have told them not to come." And her voice cracked on that last word and I believed her. I actually believed her. Because Barbara was never really the villain of this story. She was just the one they chose over and over without ever asking her if she wanted to be chosen that way. That dinner ended early. People found reasons to leave. My parents barely spoke before we walked out, and my mom hugged me at the door. A real hug, not a pat on the back hug. and she whispered, "I'm sorry, Jessica." And I didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't okay. But I said, "I know, Mom." And that was enough for that night. In the weeks that followed, things shifted in my family in ways I'm still trying to understand. My mom started calling more. Not to talk about Barbara, not to share news, just to check in on me. Real check-ins, where she actually listened. My dad, who had always been the quiet one, came over one afternoon and fixed a leaky faucet I had mentioned offhand. And then just sat with me at the kitchen table and drank coffee and didn't try to fix anything else. That meant more to me than he'll ever know. Barbara and I talked, a real talk, longer than we'd had in years. She told me she had always felt the pressure of being the favorite, that it didn't feel like a gift, it felt like a responsibility she never asked for. She said watching how her parents treated me had made her feel guilty for most of her life, but she never knew how to bring it up. And I cried during that conversation, not sad crying, more like the crying you do when something that's been stuck finally loosens. We didn't fix everything, but we opened a door that had been closed for a very long time. And Karen, my daughter, my 14-year-old girl. I asked her that night after the dinner if she had planned to say that. She thought about it for a second and then she shook her head and said, "No, I just could not say it." And then she looked at me very seriously and said, "Was that okay, Mom?" And I pulled her into the tightest hug and I told her that it was more than okay, that it was one of the bravest things I had ever seen anyone do. Because here's the thing that I keep coming back to. The thing that I think about when I lay awake at night. My daughter grew up watching me be smaller than I should have been in my own family. She watched me shrink and apologize and make peace with things that didn't deserve my peace. And when she got to a table where it was happening in real time, she didn't shrink. She didn't smooth it over. She just told the truth, calmly and clearly. Like the truth was the most natural thing in the world. And maybe it is. Maybe we just forget that sometimes. I'm not telling you this story so you feel sorry for me. David is gone, and that grief is mine, and I carry it every day, and no dinner conversation changes that. But I'm telling you this because I think a lot of us have a table like that one. A family dinner, where something real is right there on the surface, and everyone is choosing not to see it. And I think most of us spend our lives waiting for the moment where someone finally just says it. The real thing. The honest thing. Sometimes that person turns out to be 14 years old, and she's your daughter, and she's the bravest person you've ever met. If you're sitting at a table right now where you feel invisible, or your grief or your pain is being rushed or dismissed or talked over, I want you to know that your feelings are real, and they are valid, and you do not have to perform being okay for other people's comfort. You are allowed to not be okay. You are allowed to take up space in your own family. You are allowed to grieve at your own pace without someone putting a deadline on your healing. And if you're lucky, if you're really lucky, you might have a Karen in your life. Someone who loves you enough to say the thing nobody else will say. Out loud. At the dinner table. In front of everyone. Hold on to that person. And whatever you do, tell them thank you. Tell them that what they did was brave and real and good. Because the world needs more people willing to put down their fork and just tell the truth. That's my story. Thank you so much for watching it all the way to the end. And if it hit something in you, if it reminded you of your own table, your own family, your own moment of being unseen, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the right words at the right time can change everything, even one sentence, even just one.